Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live, and it is my pleasure and honor tonight to welcome our very special guest, writer, director, producer, Michael Nader. Michael, how you doing?
I'm good, John. How are you?
I'm doing great. Very excited to have you here on the show with us. I'll tell you why. I have not had a chance to talk to a lot of writers, and I really want to get into the aspect which is one of the most critical pieces, in my opinion, of any film or television show, and that is the writing. So let's just jump right into it. Let's talk about The Toll. Tell us what inspired you to the end of writing that script.
Totally, yeah. So I had been, since I graduated from USC Film School, I've been kind of trying to make my way as a writer in the industry. And sort of for your viewers, I'm sure there's a range of kind of people being aware and unaware, but it's a very challenging part of the industry. Kind of no matter I went to a very sort of high pedigree film school, and even then, it's incredibly difficult. Basically, it's all about kind of meeting the right people and creating the right friendships. And so I met this guy who was also a writer and had more recently been working as an independent producer, and his name is Will Frank. And he encouraged me and was, became a mentor of mine. And in regaling me with the stories of his own career, was kind of indicating to me he believed it would be prudent of me to start with a script that was small enough that we could go out and make it for very little, almost no money. And I think a lot of young filmmakers are hesitant to try and go make a movie for, let's say, $250,000 or $500,000 because it doesn't seem like it's possible to make a good film for that amount of money. I had other writers tell me you shouldn't do this because you should wait until you have the kind of capacity to make a bigger movie. But my mentor Will convinced me. And so I went and basically said, how can I write a story that is small and intimate and personal and not very expensive, but also reveals what I want to express as a writer and as a director, and that can still function as a great story and a hopefully an effective film. And so I was sort of just kind of going through, I sort of began with the setting, right, of sitting in the car. That was the very first image that came to me was the opening shot, which was the idea you could have an opening shot where you see a rideshare app and a driver who is hidden from us sort of swipes no on two male passengers and yes on a female passenger. And that was the opening kind of the germ of the idea, which then I said, oh, and wouldn't that be great if you could have a full extended suspense sequence that is entirely about this kind of claustrophobic relationship between the driver, who we still don't see or know, and a passenger who we start to get little bits of information about. And then I said, what if I could make and write the entire movie just based on that relationship? And on some level, I was enticed by how I felt I could write that quickly. It felt, and I did. I wrote the first 15 pages in the night that I even first sort of had the idea, because I was excited and just tantalized at the notion that you could kind of really keep the audience in that car. And then, so it really was, as I was writing it, it was a very exploratory process. A lot of what was ending up on the page were things that I wasn't necessarily pre-planning. And I think in a way that lends itself to a more at least for me, it felt like an organic process that I was able to surprise myself in writing it. And I was able to kind of create this mythology in a way that that was consistent with how the characters were discovering it. And so that was it was a very organic, very kind of natural process, beginning with the kind of relationship between the driver and the passenger, and then growing into wanting to give them a supernatural threat to put them into a classical horror film so that they could then be forced to team up and get to know each other, which would be our sort of structuring relationship.
That's awesome. Like I told Max Toplin last week, who was our guest, the Toll, what makes the Toll so fascinating is it's sort of like two stories in one. You have the mythology of the Toll Man, okay, and then you have the characters themselves and them dealing
Yeah.
with their issues, okay? And I told it was brilliantly done by you, written, because it leaves the door open to so many possibilities moving forward. I want to know more about the Toll Man. I want to know more about either before or a backstory on the Toll Man, or put a different set of people in the Toll Man's path. Was that a consideration when you were writing the script?
Yeah, it quickly became a consideration. I think in any situation where you have a story that has a mythology, that the kind of next thing that might occur to you is that there's franchise potential. I certainly, I don't inherently. I think this can be a blessing and a curse. I don't inherently have a kind of. I'm not as commercially minded as certainly producers would be, or someone like Max would be. So I didn't necessarily kind of arrive at the story and immediately say this is a franchise. But certainly, as I was creating mythology, what you sort of quickly realize is I want to keep fleshing this out. And I want to see more, I like these characters, and I like, obviously, Cammy and Spencer are consigned to this movie, but the Toll Man and the world of the Toll Man is intentionally much larger, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of mystery that's unresolved. And so for me to be writing those characters, I'm also compelled to say, I also wanted to kind of explore that more. Because the other thing about this movie is that, it behooves the story to be very kind of limited in how much it reveals about the Toll Man. I think I want to weaponize the audience's imagination against them on some level. And that means I'm not going to be giving a whole lot of backstory and a whole lot of information and a whole lot of, and also there isn't a whole lot of visual, you don't see the Toll Man for very long in the movie. The runtime, I think there's possibly 3 setups involving the Toll Man in the entire movie. And that's, on some level, that's a financial thing, but also it's built into the ethos of the movie, which is a horror movie that is low budget is going to need to operate on this style of hiding things from the audience. And so,
go on. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say I loved how it was done, because I love that we have questions after the movie is done. Is the Toll Man a single entity? Because we saw groups of people. Is that all him? Is he a spirit trapper? Every person that goes his way, does he trap their soul? Like I said, the possibilities are endless. Now, diving into the supernatural, paranormal realm, and you as a writer having to come up with this, did you use any inspiration to create the Toll Man, the mythology of the Toll Man?
Totally, yeah. So I can, there's lots of answers to that question. I'll give you a kind of a streamlined rundown. So basically, the mythology and just the idea of having this kind of eponymous character of this type, certainly, there are a lot of those kinds of characters in recent horror movies now. And I think we all owe most of that to, you can trace it back starting to H.P. Lovecraft, right? And then you go through Clive Barker and Stephen King. And certainly there's a lot of other sort of more human, there's like the slasher characters that are a little bit different, a little bit kind of a different category. But I think Lovecraft is a big influence. I think Hellraiser certainly was a big influence.
Clive Barker. Clive Barker. Have you ever had the pleasure of listening to Clive Barker talk?
Not in person, which I would love to. I've certainly listened to his interviews, and he's fantastic.
I've seen him in conventions in the 90s, and he is the most normal-looking person, but he has the most twisted mind and imagination you could possibly imagine. But please continue.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, so obviously, I mean, I owe an enormous debt to him and his, pioneering, obviously, with Hellraiser and also with Candyman, and, just the whole aesthetic of having these kinds of, I think it really, and I don't know, I'm not actually sure about what he would report as his influence, but I certainly think you can see Lovecraft and you can take the cosmic horror of Lovecraft and then kind of filter it down into these more sort of like single characters or groups of these, like ensembles of these characters. So that's kind of, and I have been exposed to a lot of those kinds of characters as well through just my love of all things horror and not just movies. I mean, that would be a sort of defining theme of whenever I'm talking about horror is that I'm insistent that we start paying more attention to the things outside of just out of film.
Yeah.
So, horror literature in particular, but then also things like horror theme park attractions that I think are denigrated unfairly, but have contributed a lot, or at least in sort of Halloween Horror Nights. There were years of Halloween Horror Nights in Orlando, and I'm from Florida, and so of course it's in my backyard, where they were doing amazing work on creating original characters and entire mythologies that were created for these attractions that you then, and I would sort of follow along each summer as they were slowly releasing the storylines of these events, which you then get to see. It's not just extrapolated onto a movie, it's extrapolated into an entire environment that you're interacting with. I mean, that was incredible and felt like it was moving, the genre forward in ways that I was very inspired by. And I think Barker was a big influence and Lovecraft was a big influence on them. And, so I think all those things sort of culminated in, okay, you're going to have this sort of eponymous horror character, which again, nowadays you would see similarities. You would say, I think a lot of viewers are going to say, it's sort of like Slender Man, Mr. Boogie from Sinister, right? And the Babadook. And certainly, and I think it would be easy for me to say those are my influences, but I think the truth is we all have the same influences, and it's kind of the people that I just described, right? So that all said, with what I sort of went, well, what's the character going to be? And the main influence was actually something from history, which was I wanted to kind of bring in the folkloric figure of the kind of highwayman or the highway robber, which in the Middle Ages was fascinating and particularly frightening because that, when going out on a main road was a truly kind of dangerous endeavor. You would have these kind of highway robbers that would come out from the trees and kill you, And I was sort of researching that, and there was a sort of a synonym for highwayman that was used in this time called the gentleman of the road. And I saw that phrase, and I was like, that is a horror character if I've ever seen one. And so that was really the root of it was, I think this all was happening at the same time when after I had started writing the script, I was rooting around. I found Gentleman of the Road, and I was like, that's the character right there. And even in the original script, that name was in there originally, and then I realized it's too much of a mouthful, and he then became the Toll Man.
That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. As you were writing the script, in particular the Toll Man, I know every writer has their own techniques, methods, and what inspires them to create. Before you started even writing the first line, did you have a very clear idea on how you wanted to start, the middle, and end it, including that great plot twist? Or did it come to you as you got into it?
Yeah, so more the latter. And it's an interesting thing where I think as any writer, you're going to have a little bit of guilt about, certainly in an academic sense, we're trained that we're very much supposed to have everything worked out. And I have just I always thrive on not knowing what's coming in the next few pages. And that and I do this less now. It's funny, I think it's been conditioned out of me over the last, I wrote the script in 2017 and I was very much a kind of young, reckless writer back then. But I think there were cool things that came out of that. One of which being that this whole story really was a matter of me going, okay, I know what the first act is. And I know who these two people are. And I know that they're going to have this really uncomfortable ride. I didn't necessarily know how that was going to play out. I let that kind of come out in the writing. And then I said, okay, I know that they're going to break down. But I didn't really know when I started writing where it was going to go from there, other than that it was going to go into a supernatural horror thing of some kind. So it was fairly kind of natural in that sense.
At which point in the writing did that whole Spencer plot twist come to you?
It is funny, yeah. I mean, and I'm sure this goes into there. People is iron. This will just sort of add to fuel their fire. But it really, I felt it was at around page 45, so around halfway through, and I had not yet figured out if there was going to be a twist or what the twist was going to be. And at that moment, I said, "Oh, it was just a bolt from the blue. Of course, the most." And I really stand by it now, and I love the twist. But it was not until halfway through that I realized that was the right way to end it. And I sort of wanted a reversal. Sometimes though, I'm like, well, I don't want to marry myself to the idea of having a twist because I think twists can be over relied upon. We can sort of, especially horror filmmakers can kind of see that as a bit of a cop out. So I wasn't necessarily sure I was going to have one. And I also think the nature of this twist is that it's one that is hiding in plain sight the whole time. And if anything, I have even already announced it to you, right? And early on in the movie before convincing you that was all red herring.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. What I loved about this movie is that, it starts out suspiciously with a guy swiping left till he comes upon a very pretty young woman. So that's right there. It's like, okay, this guy, there's something wrong. And then Cammy gets in the car. They're driving for a long time. Spencer is very awkward. But within 10, 15 minutes into the movie, I found myself, I'm like, Spencer, come on, snap out of it. Let her know that you're not a psychopath. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And it's those kind of plot twists where I'm rooting for these two to become friends, to trust each other, to realize that they need each other to get out of this situation, and then to just have it just boom, blow up in your face. I think the most simplest plot twists are the best because the majority of the movie, I was rooting for Spencer to, get Cammy to trust him. And it's that obvious twist that I did not see coming that came to fruition. Brilliant. I just absolutely,
thank you.
Absolutely brilliantly done. So when it came up to the visual representation that we saw of the Toll Man, it sort of brought me back a little bit to Friday the 13th Part 2, when Jason was wearing that burlap sack mask before he got the hockey mask. When you're writing the script, are you also narrating what the characters like the Toll Man is going to look like as well?
Yes, definitely. I obviously once you get to sort of pre-production and once you have your department head, everything is going to shift to some degree where you're going to collaborate with talented artists who are going to bring a lot of their own work. And our costume designer, Nathan Law, has brought a lot to Toll Man, but I think it's all very true to the spirit of what's described in the script, which is, there were certain things that kind of just needed to be, that the Toll Man needed to have. There were sort of some guiding principles. One of which is just that, I think these characters are tricky and they can easily fail, right? They can easily be kind of unintentionally goofy, or they can be, all horror is sort of balancing on the edge between terrifying and ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so there needed to be certain things about the Toll Man that would protect against that. One of which is just that he needs to kind of be uncanny in the sense of just almost inhuman. It's not a completely new, crazy thing. Sometimes those monsters work, but I think in this case, he needed to be mostly humanoid and kind of wearing I wanted a kind of man in white figure. And in particular, you see him, first time he's out of focus. That's another very sort of conscious choice, right? Is that he's being revealed gradually through the movie. Because at first, the other important thing about that first act is you're not sure yet if it's supernatural or a human threat. And we're really leaning pretty hard into the possibility that this could just be people. So we need to delay for a little bit the reveal, the sort of seeing the Toll Man's face to see that he has this kind of otherworldly fungal kind of material that's more cosmic horror. And so that, definitely was all, I don't know that we necessarily had the specific texture of the face and certain things like that yet in the script, but certainly just knowing that he was kind of he had sort of a blank face with just a smile and a white kind of outfit and was somewhat asymmetric. That was very much in the script. And again, that gets just built upon in the sort of pre-production phase.
I love that. I love finding out how it comes. Now, you finished the script, right? You've got a finished script. What was your next step after that in regards to the Toll?
So I took the script. I basically, Will Frank had said to me, had given me this kind of assignment, like, go write us something that we could make for $250,000. And then, so I took him the script. I had not given him a pitch or a log line or an outline or anything, which again, now I see that, I look back and I think that's crazy. Mostly I think it's crazy that I handed him basically the first draft and he said, this is fantastic, let's go make it. Which was sort of shocking to me only because nobody ever likes, any script that's ever sent to a producer, right? It's always a long process, and Will immediately kind of glommed onto it, which was a very validating thing because I also felt like we had something there. And so then, it was incredibly fortunate for me, and then I got to essentially sit back and let Will go do his thing, where he just said, because he had produced 8 other independent films at that point, all very small budgets, but that had all gotten into, mostly gotten to major festivals. So he basically said, all right, let me just think about it. And then, it was about a year later that he sort of figured out the right way to do it, which was he called me and was like, there's these 2 awesome producers who are also great actors. And he basically was like, okay, I want you to look them up right now because are they not dead ringers for Spencer and Cammy? That was the very first, was like me just looking up the 2 of their work and being, they are those roles. And so it was really, Will cast the movie in that sense. Will basically said, like, this is such a perfect, like, they would be phenomenal for these roles. They'd be phenomenal as producers. Let's all partner up. And it just felt like the right kind of this small team that could go and make a movie. So that all, it all worked out better than I ever could have expected in that sense.
So that's when you teamed up with Max and Jordan. So you got the team together. Now, from that point, when did you find out that you're going to be directing this thing?
So, there were 2 kind of different, there's the moment at which we went into it right away saying that I would direct it. And thankfully, Max and Jordan were on board with that from the beginning because I also showed them a short that I had directed so it was kind of a package. We sent them my short, we sent them the script, and we sent them a pitch deck that I had made for the Toll. And so they were immediately on board with me directing it. And then in terms of obviously getting a movie funded, even a very low budget movie is incredibly difficult to get. It's like, the running theme, like everything in the industry is very hard. And so I didn't really expect anything. I kind of put it out of my mind. I think we met with them in March of 2018, and then it was August of 2018 when we got the green light, which essentially meant the money was in the bank and we were ready to go, which just blew me away. And not just, I knew that the 2 of them were incredibly skilled producers and were going to, if anybody could do it, they could. But I had such a belief that, I didn't want to, it was so kind of too good to be true that I would get to go and direct this script that I also wrote. So that was when it was very fast, that's when we found out, and then we were shooting a month and a half later.
That is so awesome. Now let's switch over to the directing part. You've done some. Was this your first full feature? I know you've done a lot of shorts. This was your first.
This is my directing debut. Yeah.
Okay. Now, explain to us what's bringing to life your vision as a director, something that you created on paper. What's that like?
Yeah. I guess the first thing I would say is that process began when I started writing the script. Particularly in this case, when I knew I intended to direct it, if it was going to happen. The writing was incredibly influenced by how I felt that I wanted to convey things. And the perfect example being the whole long take opening shot was very much part and parcel of the script. I just knew there were so many things in the script that were already kind of, that I was doing the directing work already then. And so now, and on that level, it's kind of, there's part of it where part of the process where writing and directing are kind of fused together.
Mm-hmm.
And then editing is kind of fused into it as well. Sort of like those are the 3 kind of acts of making a movie. But like that said, certainly once we got, it was about a month before we were greenlit, and it was when I finally was hearing rumors that we might actually be getting the money, that then I actually sat down and I started to, it really was just a kind of almost entirely in my head process at first of just sitting down and going, okay, what is this going to look like? What are the exact shot by shot, essentially kind of fabricating it in my brain on like a, in a sort of mental animatic, I guess. And then going, okay, I mean, part of this also is like, what can we achieve, obviously, because I knew at that point what our budget was going to be. And so I was very kind of like, all right, I had stylistic ideas where it was like, we need to be very minimalist. We need to like really lean into kind of long takes and sort of sitting back and having a very light hand directorially, because all of those things, well, that tends to be the style I like anyway, but that's also more kind of financially, it's more doable. I mean, one of the big terrors, right, you have is that like, it's possible it's a 15-day shoot, and there's always a possibility, what if we don't get a coherent story? What if we're missing, if the bedroom scene didn't get shot, we wouldn't have a movie, and we would just, I wouldn't be sitting here, right? And so on some level, you have to be thinking about it as an assistant director and as like a scheduler as well. So that's kind of, those are the two things going on in my head, is like, what do I want this to look like? And then how can I achieve this? And that was sort of the big, like, opening part of the directing process.
So when the last scene was done and it was a wrap, you guys probably had a little celebration. Did you stay with the film during the editing process?
Yes. So I actually edited it myself. It was sort of yet another kind of a part of the, when you're ragtag team of indie filmmakers, that there are things like that just sort of make sense, where it's like I would effectively be editing it anyway if I were sort of in a situation like this, where I could have gotten an assistant editor, but it was kind of like, we might as well. So I was kind of the one, in the Avid, right, which was good for me, because editing was kind of my production focus in film school. Mm-hmm. So that all worked out nicely for me. So I stayed with it. I mean, and if anything, the very intense part of the process actually was doing that first cut, because, you just don't know that you have a movie. I was pretty sure, I got off set and I was like, I'm pretty sure we've got it. And it's very binary, right? It's like either we got everything that we needed or we didn't. And there wasn't a lot of room to kind of luxuriate in a lot of good takes. We basically had one great take of every shot, and that was all that I knew we had time for. So when it came time for me it was, me sitting in a room on my computer putting together the first cut, just desperately hoping and racing through it, because I was so eager to find out, is this going to work or not? And, thank goodness I reached the end and was like, okay, we're good.
Oh, God, that's awesome. I love this information. So I'm just fascinated by how it's done. So now the editing's done. You actually have a final product. Do you turn it over now to Max and Jordan, since they're they're producing, they're the ones that secured the funding, and is it their job to try to get the movie into festivals?
Yes. So for the most part, I mean, we all kept in very close contact this whole time. So there was, it never really felt like it was kind of leaving me in a way. Like I think, certainly for my part, I always wanted to be very involved and to know, much as it's an overused metaphor, I want to make sure my child is being shepherded off into the world by safe, by safe means. And so of course I wanted to know, and contribute to the conversation about all of our strategy. But essentially, I mean, it was entirely Max and Jordan's brilliance and their strategic just wisdom that led to us to the whole sequence of events, as I'm sure Max probably described, although maybe he understated his own how sort of smart they were, because it really was a great method of, we originally found a sales agent, and then the sales agent helped us on our festival run. So I think there's an easy instinct of filmmakers to go, oh, well, I'll just submit it on Without a Box. And that's a really hard thing to ever even, get your movie seen. Whereas what you really have to do is be really clever about having, screenings of your movie. And of course you need people to like your movie, and you need to get sales agents to see it. So there's a lot of on the ground publicity and sort of marketing that goes into that. So you need the people to see the movie, like it, and then you need to sort of work with a sales agent who can then becomes a sort of partner in the process.
Did it go through the film festival circuit during or before COVID hit?
Well, it was interesting because essentially South by was the very end of our circuit. We we're waiting, and this is another part of the sort of strategy, is you want to wait for a really big premiere. So we didn't even we only submitted to the very biggest festivals. And just as it happened, when we started submitting, it was right after South by of 2019.
Okay.
So we went through the whole, it was sort of TIFF and Sundance and other sort of similar really big festivals, which are, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to get into any of these things. And also there were moments where we were deciding not to submit to big ones because our sales agent was very intent on South by as a target. And so, it even makes it all the more just ironic and poetic, I guess. The whole time we were aiming for South by, and then we got into South by, and it was like, this is our dreams have come true. And then, of course, what else would happen but a pandemic that would cause the entire world to shut down, including, of course, South by.
So the movie in South by did it get virtual screenings? I mean, I don't remember when COVID hit, was South by virtual, or did they cancel it altogether that year?
So they had a virtual thing. Most features opted out of it. I mean, just in terms of a sort of industry strategy, it was just going to be hard. You weren't going to get the benefits of what you normally would get from a festival, which is buyers in the audience. And so most movies said, so I think they did something with Amazon Prime and it was mostly shorts, where if you wanted to just get an audience, you could do that. So we opted out so that we could but what we did do, that again was brilliant on the part of Max and Jordan, was we basically said, we're going to forego, even though we have not had a festival premiere, we'll just forego that entirely and look at it as if South by was our premiere,
Mm-hmm.
and just aggressively go after buyers just with the publicity that we got off of South by and even South by being canceled. And that worked for us, which was awesome.
That is awesome. I watched the movie on Vudu. Okay, so after the festivals, when did you find out, and who is actually the official distributor of the toll?
So the distributor is Saban Films, and they are fantastic. So they essentially came on board in April of 2020. So it was a pretty fast, sort of mercifully for us, where we're all on tenterhooks. We didn't have to wait too long to sort of find out if we were going to have a home, and so we had a decent amount of buyer interest, with a little bit of some somewhat competitive, and then Saban kind of was who we ended up going with. And so they sort of decided to buy us in April, and then the process begins of they go through their motions of getting everything set up and figuring out.
Yeah, basically you turn everything over to them at that point.
Yes, 100%. At that point, it's very much like it's kind of in there.
Mm-hmm.
They get to make a lot of the decisions. Really, they become the sort of authority on. All right, we're gonna get this movie out to the world and trust us, and we did, and it all worked out awesome.
Now, do you feel the whole experience, writing, directing, going through the film festival circuit, getting hooked up with Saban, did you already know all that, or was this a big learning experience for you?
Huge learning experience for sure. I mean, I think there are certain things that I think a big part of my preparation for directing a movie, and one of the only reasons why I felt content or at ease knowing that I could do it, is that I had also written 2 other features that had gotten produced, and 2 close friends were the directors separately. There was 2 movies, and each of them I was friends with the director, and I kind of got to observe the process pretty closely. So a lot of the stuff that I hadn't known before, I was able to learn through observing those 2 movies get made. And then also, I think just once I was able to like be, comfortable embracing the process, there were so many things that I learned, which, you kind of just roll with it. There were enormous things that I learned, and certainly chief among them were the things that you could never have learned from anybody, which is how do you navigate the film industry, and the only time that movie theaters have ever been closed, including World War II. I mean, it's truly, I think it's hard to overstate how crazy it is to be kind of trying to be navigating the film world. in an actually unprecedented. I mean, it's unprecedented in a number of ways, but really the industry has never quite seen something in this
No,
same
no.
category, and so it's bizarre.
Everybody
Yeah,
was coming. Every studio, everybody was trying to come up with the unique ways to continue business going in this horrible time that we're going through. So
yeah.
now that Saban owns the toll, I'm sure you, as a writer now, going back to your writer, you have ideas on, if this does go into a prequel or a sequel. You might have even, I'm not asking you to give it away, but you might have even started putting stuff on paper already for a prequel or a sequel to The Toll. Uh, does Saban now have exclusive rights to any sequels and whatnot?
That's a question. See, that's more of a Max question. I don't know definitively. I know it's all kind of complicated. I do know that the decision is out of my hands, and I think it might actually be more in Max and Jordan's hands.
Okay.
But I'm not. The point at which it sort of transferred, I kind of transferred that decision to Max and Jordan. So that's kind of the reason why I don't even necessarily know the answer. But also, as with any situation like this, there would need to be kind of, for it to make sense, unless, I guess, if I really diehard wanted to, if I wanted to kind of just make my career or my early career all about the Tollman, I could have that movie ready to go, right? And then really attack the town, go out and be like, this is, we've got this movie. But I think, with sequels in this vein, it tends to be more a matter of having kind of preliminary buyer interest, of somebody saying, and I'm not 100% sure if there is or isn't yet, and certainly if these things will evolve, but I think it would take somebody kind of coming to us and saying we would love to see a sequel or a prequel, and certainly I would love to be a part of that in any way that I am permitted to be. But yeah, I mean, it's not, I think on some level, for me, I am very proud of this movie and I love this movie and the world, but I also am kind of eager and ready to keep moving and kind of keep doing more projects and diversifying and sort of exploring other niches of the genre. And so I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily have my eyes glued to The Toll 2, but I'm
Open.
so very open to it. Yes.
Now, you being a diehard fan, diehard horror fan like I am, we've all seen the horror movies, great movies, and then in the last few minutes they try to add this, how do I call it, this twist, just to leave the possibility of a franchise maybe developing. The beauty of The Toll is you didn't have to do that. The whole movie itself, as I explained earlier, begs the viewers who watch it to want to know more. Now, without revealing anything, would you prefer to see, if this franchise continues, to put a whole different group of people in the Toll Man's path? Or would you like to see a story that just explores the mythology of the Toll Man? Now, if you could separate yourself as the writer, and what would you like to see?
Yeah, I think I would, for me, it's a relatively easy choice of seeing another person or group of people in the Tollman's path in a new, bigger way. I mean, it's really, and I'm not even necessarily giving anything away because nothing is set in stone, but I can just tell you my instincts are very much, I think you need to take a big step up in a way to make a sequel and to kind of reinvent it on some level, because I mean, it's also almost, this is sort of maybe an odd comparison, maybe not. I think of the Saw franchise, which obviously you can certainly say lots of things about the directions in which the franchise went, but I think what they knew about what's great about the first movie is that the twist is kind of a big part of, not knowing what the twist is a big part of enjoying that first movie. And I think The Toll operates in a similar way. Yeah. And so Saw 2, of course, then they immediately realized that you can't just put another two characters into a room, because we already, now that we've seen the first one, we know everything about Jigsaw. We know that there's going to be these hiding in plain sight twists. So what do? They bring in a whole ensemble of characters and they turn it into more of a, more about the character dynamic. And again, I think without sort of making any pronouncements about kind of how successful those sequels were, I think you would need to take a similar approach to a sequel to this. And I've even thought of in terms of kind of changing the time setting. Like, could you have so I'm intrigued by a prequel in the sense of maybe not even showing the origin of the Toll Man, but just taking it to another time period, especially since it's so influenced by, historical highwaymen. I think there's a lot of opportunities. It's about, like, it's such a movie about the perils of travel. And of course, using the modern version of that, which is rideshare, and a young woman that's sort of afraid of flying and has a backstory that portends danger with a strange man in her car. All of that, I think, works great in a contemporary setting. But I'm also curious, what's can we get into the horrors and the fears of the perils of traveling in a previous era, because it certainly has changed a lot. And so I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. And then, certainly expanding the sense of place. I don't think we would want to just stay in this one road. And I think because again, I think you would want the second, if there's a sequel, to operate on the same level of surprise and thrills and emotional engagement as the first. And that means you're going to have to expand the mythology. So I probably, again, I'm not really giving anything away, but I'm giving a very in-depth look at my thought process there.
And that brings me to my next question, okay? The character that we see that meets up with Cammy and Spencer on the tractor, all right? A lot is left up to interpretation with this woman. She could be a ghost, all right? She could be a spirit. She can be a living person that somehow, we don't know how, gets into that little, I don't even know what to call it, repetitive, other dimensional realm that Cammy and Spencer are in, and she just happened to go in and out. You may not even have an answer for this, even though you created her, but did you just want to leave it for viewer interpretation for now? Or do you know this, first of all, is this person alive or dead? Is she a ghost or not? If you can answer.
I think, in the writing of it, see, the thing is, I don't want to shut it down. This is, I sort of hate when filmmakers equivocate like this, so I'm going to do something that I myself don't like. But because, of course, I did create it, and so I should have all the answers. To me, I think she's a living, real person.
Okay.
That said, though, I do think art takes on new life. Like, art is a collaborative process between the creators and the audience. So on some level, I don't think I can necessarily definitively say, because it absolutely is open. It's not definitively proven by any means. No other character interacts with her. Mm-hmm. So she certainly could be. And there's an interesting version of the movie where that's the case. I think, to me, she is a real person, because I like the idea that it is a brief instant of camaraderie that Cammy has with another woman in this world who has also seemingly been through. Like, I feel like the idea is that she looks at Cammy and goes, I kind of know what's happening here, and because I've been through it. And I think for her, there is, the actress and I both had a similar idea of the experience that she might have gone through with the Toll Man. And it was another kind of another male in her life who was threatening, right? And so keeping that as something that's almost the briefest character bonding moment between her and Cammy, I do like. But maybe that can also work if she's a spirit.
One of the fascinating things for me when it comes to that woman on the tractor, when she says, touch me, you'll see that, it'll go through. Of course, that never happens. Is that how you wrote it? Or did you guys actually film it where Spencer or Cammy tries to touch her and their hand goes through her, and you just decided when you were editing it, you know what, it's better if we leave this out for now?
It's written precisely as you see it on screen. So, and there's two reasons for that. Okay. One is I think I anticipated that visual. I think it's a more interesting idea than it is something to see on screen, if that makes sense. I love the idea of her just offering that and her reaching her hand out. And so I think I was more enticed by that visual than I was. I think it would maybe look goofy if you tried to do it. And also
a little cheesy, maybe, yeah.
Yes. certainly to do it well, I think you would need a really interesting take digital VFX wise that I don't know that we had the means for. The other reason I think the most important beat of that scene that I really like is that gives Cammy an opportunity to prove that she is now starting to trust and actually like Spencer, because that's the first moment where, I mean, in general, that's the first scene in the movie where the two of them are on the same side. They're almost always opposed, even visually. But so they're on the same side, and then also she pulls him back as a way of trying to protect him, right? And that is I love the idea that you have this kind of unconscious, the attention is not called to it, but they progressively become closer throughout the movie just by virtue of going through this experience together. And so that's, I think the essence of that moment when the tractor woman reaches out her hand really is more about Cammy and Spencer in that scene.
Okay, beautifully said. Now, when you three guys, you, Jordan, Max, were working together, did they try to make any changes to your script that you thought were great, or maybe you thought were not so great? Or did they stick strictly to what you gave them to their lines and didn't question anything?
In terms of like on a macro level, they were, I mean, the entire process with respect to the script, they were really wonderful in a way that I wasn't even, I think it would be very easy for a producer to want to kind of put their fingerprints on a script and also just to kind of enter into a bigger development process. And they were so trusting, and I think it really helped that they responded so well to their first read of that script, that they really felt like they wanted to preserve the experience they had of reading it. Some things changed, but it was all collaborative, and it was all kind of like, we all knew there were certain things that were slightly too big budget. And so it was very kind of, there were never any moments where I had any sort of friction with what they wanted to do or change. And it was all you're all kind of on the same side. Certainly in terms of, I'm not I don't want actors to be married to dialogue that isn't gonna sound right coming out of their mouths. Mm-hmm. Every person and every actor is different, and there are certain things that just don't quite work for different people. That said, again, they were it's quite close to what you see in the movie, but in every case, I always was very open to them changing it to be what they wanted it to be. And also certainly, I'm so always eager for improv. They both had great improv contributions, and I only am more able to summon Max's by memory, because they tend to be, Max is kind of just inherently has a comedian side to him, and he added a lot of humor in the moment to Spencer that was not on the page. And so again, they only ever were adding things. I mean, and Max, especially in finding a kind of a funny side to Spencer. Like, just to give an example, when Cammy says, "Can you wait outside?" The line when she gets in, his line is, "Locked out of your own fucking car," and he added again at the end of that line, which is such a, like, it's a small thing, but it just adds such a sort of question about what happened before that I just found hilarious. And he was really great at that kind of thing.
One of the most powerful sequence of scenes in the movie for me was when Cammy was alone in the woods and the tall man is playing on her past trauma. The biggest line for me that really struck was powerful is when younger Cammy, it's a projection, it's not actually real, looks to real Cammy and says, "Tell me it gets better." And Cammy just looks down. She can't tell her younger version of herself that life does get better than her current circumstances. When you watch the final product, did you that came out exactly the way I wanted it to?
Totally, yeah. I mean, that whole scene, and I'm so glad that resonates with you, because to me that is kind of that and the subsequent, in particular, the two interactions that she has with her other self are kind of the thesis statement of the movie put together, starting with, or sort of the antithesis, in the sense that the toll man is essentially telling her in both these interactions, it's never going to get better. You're trapped in the world of the toll man forever. And the kind of ultimate statement of the movie is, as she's being driven away, that she realizes that was wrong, and that she realizes that there is something good out there, and she's leaving this darkness behind her. But I think that was a critically important scene and really hard, right? I mean, that's especially, and you point out the younger Cammy scene. It's just a very challenging thing in that Jordan is acting opposite a double, essentially, in both setups. So she's acting opposite a double who's doubling as her younger self, and then reversed. And so she's not. It's a major acting challenge that I think she pulled off incredibly well.
Amazing,
and
yes.
Yeah, and that whole sequence, she's phenomenal, and it was incredibly just challenging. That day was just a really difficult day because the subject matter obviously is so grave. And, we had, I was communicating to everybody on set that we needed to have a very kind of somber attitude. And we tried to keep Jordan sort of away from the set because even as she started to walk up to the bed, she was getting very emotional. And, we kind of wanted to save that. It really, it's like there's some elaborate setups in that scene, and she's kind of getting these amazing, she has such incredible emotion pouring out of her on the first or second take. So we had to be really careful about not doing too many takes. So, I think she really blew that scene away. So yeah, when I watch it, it very much has the effect on me that I remember just sort of thinking about it and writing it having on me when I wrote it.
It was great. When the sense that we get after watching that sequence with Cammy, with her younger self, and in particular with her older self, is that the Tollman prefers for his victims to take their own lives. And that's what he does. He uses their pain and sort of entices them to kill themselves. Is that his method of collecting souls, for lack of a better term? Or he doesn't care, either kill yourself or kill each other, I'm taking one of you?
It's whatever is sort of the most effective. It's kind of whatever death is closest at any given time is what he's going to be trying to pull toward him. And so for that reason, you see his tactics change throughout the movie, right? Where he first is trying really hard because, he is using the fact that she's suspicious of him from the get-go and is afraid that he might kill her, duly so.
Mm-hmm.
So he's immediately tapping into that and trying to trigger her to kill him in self-defense. Once he kind of wins that battle, right, of convincing her he's innocent, then the next thing is she's already close enough in her pain and her despair. That's the next angle that he takes, right? And then finally, one of the hardest things for the Tollman to convince either of them of is to convince Spencer that he can do exactly what he's been wanting to do without any retribution. So that's the final tactic, which Spencer then takes.
Another question that we're left with as viewers is: was Spencer aware of the Tollman mythology? Did he take that turn on the road that Cammy's like, whoa, you're going the wrong way? Did he do that on purpose, or was it his GPS telling him to go this way, as he explained? And he had no idea of the Tollman, but it fed him into the perfect circumstances of what a psychopath wants, a victim in an isolated area where they can do what they want to do.
So yeah, I this one I think I can sort of definitively rule out the other interpretation, which is he definitely does not know about the Tollman.
Okay.
And part of that is critical to the story because for him to, some of the dialogue moments where I'm hoping that's conveyed is when he says, and obviously it's an intense scene, so it's kind of easy to miss it. But when he says, at first I thought he was trying to punish me, that's the sort of, he is going into this knowing nothing except that he's on his way to kill his next victim. And if you sort of look at it from that perspective, he's on his way to kill his next victim, and then crazy things start happening that are preventing him from doing that. So his first thought is going to either be, I've been caught, or this is divine punishment.
Yeah.
And so he then has to be convinced by the Tollman that it's neither of those things. So in that sense, and obviously, the whole reason why the Tollman brings them in is because he is in that vicinity and he's so close to killing her that it's the proximity to death that brings them in and that then traps them in the world of the Tollman.
Excellent. Well, very well put. Now, we only have a few minutes left. I want to spend just a little bit of time. You're a young man, extremely successful. You just have this great movie that just came out. It's going to get rave reviews. As I tell everybody, history, as the tall man, gets older and older, it's going to be put in a category by itself.
Well,
For
thank you.
young up and coming writers, directors, what was your biggest break, and what advice would you give to somebody who does want to break into writing? Writing. Let's just stick with writing. There are a lot of writers out there. What advice would you give them?
So yeah, I mean, I think so much advice has been conveyed by so many other great writers, and I think everything about the craft that has already been said in terms of you need to be writing if you want to write, and you need to read as much as humanly possible. These are all kind of at this point trite pieces of advice, but very true. My advice that I feel like doesn't get said enough, that I think is crucial, is that it's really about to make it. If you want people to see your work, it starts with creating relationships with people in the industry.
Exactly.
And that's not about networking. I mean, I think this is the thing I want to sing from the rooftops, is to not look at it as networking or as trying to use people for something, but as, I just don't think it can work if you are operating that kind of in a Machiavellian way. You have to be looking to make friends. And also you should be looking for people that need things that you can provide them. So if you find an executive that's looking for a certain kind of story that you happen to have, or you even just are finding you meet an executive who needs, I mean, just as an example, I interned for this awesome exec who's now a close friend. He was my boss. And in the semesters following my internship, he needed interns. And I kept in touch with him by basically saying, you should use this friend of mine who's an awesome reader and writer. And I just kept he needed interns. And my friends needed internships. So it was a whole self-reinforcing thing. He was essentially the first person that gave me he was a VP by the time I graduated. He read one of my scripts, really liked it, and that's how I ended up getting representation. So it's all about finding those friendships.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you. I just passed my 1 year anniversary of doing this show, and I'm 1 year into this industry. And I would say, without a doubt, the most important thing is to build up your connections. Okay?
Yeah.
Just because you come across someone that is not any way associated with writing does not mean you ignore them. No, everybody, every connection you make in this industry, because this industry is actually a lot smaller than people think. It's not that, everybody knows somebody and the connections are there, but I totally agree with you. Connections is number one, and we are out of time. Michael, this hour has just flown by. It's been absolutely fascinating. I learned so much. You have so much brilliant stuff that I am looking forward to seeing coming from you. Personally, I really would love to see another Toll movie. I hope it comes to fruition. I hope you get to write it. I hope you get to direct it and make it any way you want. You've shown us in the original, the one that's out, that you have a great imagination. You know exactly how to tell a story, and you know exactly how to direct it. So congratulations on a great movie. Awesome.
Thank you.
Fantastic. It's been my absolute pleasure having you. Any final thoughts you want to share with our audience?
Just want to say thank you so much for having me and giving me such a great forum to get to talk about the movie. It's been fantastic. So yeah, thank you so much.
It is my pleasure. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back in the air tomorrow with William Brent Bell, who's another writer, director, and producer. So please tune in for that. Michael, thank you. Till tomorrow, guys. Remember, stay walking. Good night.